Yes, certainly we're looking at new kinds of propulsion, and it really, the question you have to think about first is where are you launching from? So if we're to launch off of Earth, then you're going to need some kind of a heavy lift, like what we already have, or what we designed for Apollo wouldn't get you to the moon, but something similar like that, a multi-stage rocket, which is what we're looking at for next generation vehicles. If you're launching from someplace like the ISS, you could use something like what we looked at for ion propulsion. So very small bursts of thrust. You really don't need that much. And in fact, when the astronauts are on board the International Space Station, we talk about something called fingertip forces, which is that's all you need is just a very light touch, and you will start moving in the direction in which you apply the force, or the opposite direction. So same goes for rocketry and propulsion techniques to get us there. So it's a very interesting trade of, are we going to launch everything from here on Earth and use all of that fuel to get us up and then use tiny thrust to get us there, or are we going to launch from somewhere else? That is a huge area of research. If you're interested, there is a lot of information out there, and we can talk more too. Good question.
Why was it you launched from the desert in that mission? I can't remember who it was, but why was it you launched from the desert?
So the question was, why did we launch from the desert? Well, this was where the Russians had launched from, and the reason why it was in a desert is there's not that many people there. And so in Florida, we launch out over the ocean for the same reason. In case something goes wrong, you don't want to put the people on the ground in jeopardy and danger, and it's the same thing for launching in the desert. So there's very little, small amount of people anywhere near the launch pad, so it's a good place to launch from.
Yeah, and of course the reason that it was built there, really, in addition to those, is that it was built during the Cold War, if you remember, during the time when it was the Soviet Union. And so they wanted it to be very secret, and so they put it about as far away from anywhere as they could. If you look at where Baikonur Cosmodrome is at, it's in Kazakhstan, actually, and it's about in the middle of the Asian continent. And of course now it's in Kazakhstan, and not in Russia, so Russia leases it from Kazakhstan for a few million a year.
I would like to ask if you have exercises before you go about psychological effects of being put in space, because if you imagine the excitement of being on the launch pad and the elation when you meet fellow members up in the space station, what is it like when you're up there and you're not seeing family and friends and there's a lack of privacy, possible isolation from the rest of the humankind, and particularly your families?
Well, that's a good question. Actually, we're not as isolated as you might think. But one part of the question was, is there any preparation for that? And other than psychological screening that we do in the selection process, there really isn't that much. But I think we understand what we're getting into. And as far as the isolation, we actually have our phone on board the International Space Station that we can pick up 90% of the time. There's gaps in our coverage, but 90% of the time we can just pick up the phone and call anybody we want at any time. Once a week we have video conferencing with our family, and that's always nice. And you have this feeling of detachment when you're in space because you're living in an environment. It's an existence not that we're used to on the Earth. You can't feel the breeze in your face. You can't see birds flying over the lake in the morning. You miss a lot of things, and it makes us feel disconnected. But at the same time, we're more connected. When we get the news up there, and if you're watching the news and you find something is going on on the Earth, there's flooding in the Mississippi Valley. Libya Tripoli just fell in Libya. You look at the map and you say, oh, we'll be there in 2 minutes, and you float over to the window, and you can take pictures and see that. And there were so many of those instances of seeing things, hearing about things, and then being able to experience it firsthand and see it with our own eyes. So that's not going to be the same when we go to Mars, though. When we go to Mars, it's going to be a whole nother ballgame there.